Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome to the Oriental Café, a podcast where we will sit at the same table to explore the fascinating worlds of Egyptian dance, personal empowerment, and halas, life. I'm your host, Joana Saahirah, world-renowned Oriental dancer, teacher, choreographer, and author, the creator of the pioneering Joana Saahirah's World and Joana Saahirah's Online Dance School. I will meet you at the Oriental Café every 2 weeks, alone or with a guest, sharing intimate yet universal conversations. In agreement or disagreement, we will create bridges and inspire each other, because the world is only one, and so is our human soul. Ready to fall in love? Yalla bina! So welcome everyone to a new episode of the Oriental Café podcast. I have with me Raphael Cormack, our second-time guest. We have done a webinar on your first book, Midnight in Cairo, a while ago, and it has been an amazing experience. And now you have a new book. We're going to talk about both books and about the Arab world and why we're so fascinated with everything that you speak about in both of the books I've already mentioned. So welcome, Raphael. Thank you for being here again.
Yeah, great to be back again.
I believe it's going to be a very interesting conversation, perhaps polemic. I'm not sure. It will depend on your answers. We live in a very polarized time, and we are going to touch a few subjects that I believe can provoke reactions. Let's put it this way. So you are a writer, you are a scholar, you are a professor at Durham University.
Yeah.
Professor of Arabic culture.
I'm in the Arabic department, and I mostly teach courses on culture, cultural history, a little bit of translation too.
Okay, so let's start there. Why the interest in the Arab world?
I don't have Arab heritage as such. I think it started, I mentioned translation. I think it started when I went to Sudan on kind of holiday to Khartoum, which is...
You went on holiday to Khartoum?
Yeah, my sister was working there.
Okay.
Okay. And it's a beautiful city, really amazing city. And I was taken by it, but I think in particular at that time I was also taken by the Arabic language.
Why? What made the Arabic language interesting to you? Was it the way it sounds?
I think it's I'd only learned kind of Indo-European languages before then. So French, Latin, and Greek, some German, not very well, which I've now totally forgotten. And other than looking very different to all those languages, which I think is the first thing that strikes people, but actually the least interesting thing about Arabic is that it looks different.
Yes.
The way that it's just put together in such a different way to other Indo-European languages. I think people who start learning Arabic, so at Durham, pretty much all the students that we have come in with no Arabic whatsoever and start learning it with us. And it's interesting to see kind of the same things that I was fascinated by as someone first taking up the language, just the way that it works in 3-letter roots mostly, and that you can form words by putting these sort of 3 letters in different combinations. I mean, the obvious one that people go with is ketaba, which means write. Then katib is writer, and maktub is something that's written, and all of this kind of stuff. I was fascinated by that. And then I went to learn it more. I went to Egypt, to Cairo. In 2009 for the first time, and then for a longer period from 2010 to 2011.
You went to Egypt to learn the Egyptian dialect or Fusha, the classical Arabic, or both?
I mean, both really. So in most schools, they focus on teaching the classical and maybe give you a bit of the dialect on the side, or at least they did back then. I think more now they're more trying to incorporate the dialect earlier. But living there, I mean, you pick up the dialect. And Cairo is an incredible city. I mean, I think
I agree.
love it or hate it, it's and most people do both at the same time.
I sometimes I hate it, I love it, but it's still the most interesting city I've ever been.
Yeah,
You know,
I've never been anywhere else quite like it.
no. It's the richest, most multi-layered, most alive, most dynamic, most fascinating, most everything, fill in the blank, that I've ever been. But mostly the most alive. If I
Yeah,
had to choose one word, it's the most alive that I've ever known. And I'm hearing about the Arabic language, and as a dancer and as a dance teacher, sometimes there is this argument that knowing Arabic, knowing how to speak Arabic, gives you an insider look into the culture and consequently into the dance. I totally agree with that. Of course, this is unpopular because most dancers will never study Arabic. So they feel, okay, am I left out? What does that mean? If I don't know how to speak Arabic, does that mean there is a dimension of the music, a dimension of the dance that I'm never going to grasp? And I have to be honest,
maybe.
yes, there is a dimension you are never going to grasp, because when you learn to speak Arabic, at least this is how I felt it. And I did not learn it in a school. I learned it because I worked in Egypt for more than 10 years. So I was learning, picking it up from people. I felt the door to understand Egyptian culture opened when I learned how to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because particularly, so I teach now in a modern languages department. In Durham, that's where Arabic is. It's not in a Middle Eastern studies department or something like this. And people are they're not saying, but they're worried that people are going to say, well, when we have AI translation and everything, who's actually going to learn languages? But I'm glad to hear you say.
Yeah, no, because the learning of the language creates new wiring in your brain. The effort of learning a new word, knowing what it means, how it's used, it kind of expands your brain and it expands your sensibility, especially with the Arabic language, which is, as you know, very rich in meaning, very poetic, in itself very multi-layered. So one word can mean so many different things depending on how you say it, when you say it, the intention behind, especially in Egypt, where people are very communicative. I don't know if you felt that while you were there, but everyone is so expressive. It's a very communicative, expressive culture. So the way Egyptians use the language, for instance, it's very different from the way Moroccans use the language, or in Saudi Arabia or in Lebanon, people use the language in different ways. In Egypt, they have a very creative use of the language. So the language itself is already so rich, and then come Egyptians, and they make it fly. They make it sing. It's amazing, and no intelligence, artificial anything, would replace the process that happens within when you learn this language. Nothing can replace that.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm glad to hear you say it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you are the author of two amazing books. One is here. That's the most recent, Holy Men of the Electromagnetic Age. And I must confess, I was very surprised when I saw this title. I was like, why? That's interesting, but why? It's such a detour somehow, Yani. Somehow
We'll
it is
get to
and it
that.
is not. From your first book, Midnight in Cairo, the one that I mentioned in the beginning of the episode. And by the way, I'm going to share the link to the webinar we did on that book in the show notes so that our listeners can check it up. These two books, they have a few things in common. So there is a focus on the 1920s and 30s, those specific decades, right?
Yeah.
There is kind of a I feel, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you're drawn to that time?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, there's the books go a little bit outside of those periods, but they are the central focus of both.
The German, I feel, comes from the 1920s, 1930s. There is something about those decades that keep dragging you back. I feel that's the sensation that I get. Then both books have the exoticism of the Middle East, of the Orient, and this idea that there is something that we Westerners need to recover in the Orient. It's like an old and yet very, very modern need to go back to the Orient to get, I'm not sure what. What is it that we're
I would
looking
put it in a
for?
slightly different way and say what I'm trying to do with both of these books in terms of, the Orient, the Middle East, whatever we want to call it, is write it into the history of the 1920s and 30s of the modern world in a much more focused and sustained way. That is to say, so my first book is about cabarets and the entertainment scene, broadly speaking, and at least I sort of feel I have a vague idea of that scene, and more so having written the book, but in Germany, in Berlin in the 1920s, in Paris in the 1920s, elsewhere, we know that there was this big flowering of cabarets, but no one ever seems to talk about it in terms of the Middle East and what was going on.
So you felt there was a void. There was a void.
And a void that once you start to sketch it, you can see actually the Middle East is really connected to all of these scenes. People are coming from Europe to perform in Cairo. People are going to Cairo to perform in Europe. We'll talk about this with the next book. That's even more so with the second book. So to write about it as part of our history in a sense, but also to write about it as, on its own terms with its own concerns, because the concerns of Egypt and Syria, Lebanon, Palestine are different to what people are thinking about in Europe, but they are connected. That's sort of what I think I want to say.
These are also decades where Europeans were running away to Egypt, and then they ran from Egypt back to Europe for different reasons. People were jumping back and forth, and there is a lot of communication. Yeah, I agree. A lot more communication between these worlds than the one that we imagine.
Yeah.
Right? So much more. And for sure, your books address that. I can see how that void was somehow filled by both books. And also, you focused on strong characters. Mm-hmm. Real characters, they're not fiction.
No.
So
sometimes you might think that they are.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, because so often you look at life and it's so rich. Why would you even need to invent a character when there are so many amazing characters, real characters? So in Midnight in Cairo and Holy Men of the Electromagnetic Age, they bring together a series of real characters, really strong, infamous characters. What is it that has drawn you to this specific, somehow outlaws? They're kind of marginal characters, right? They're all out of the box. The dancers and the actresses, all the amazing women that you cover in Midnight in Cairo, and then these two men, these two mystics, okay, that you portray in the newest book. They have in common this out of the box, outcast, marginal, rebellious, smart ass quality. Was it that drew you to these characters, or something else?
Yeah, well, before I answer that question, I will answer that question. You ask how I got to Holy Men of the Electromagnetic Age from Midnight in Cairo.
Yeah.
One answer to that is just pretty simple, which is as I was doing research for Midnight in Cairo, looking at who was performing at cabarets, who was performing in nightclubs, one thing that kept coming up over and over again is that there were a lot of hypnotists and spiritualists who would share a bill with, say, Munir al-Mahdeya. She would sing a few songs. Then on would come Dr. Salomon Bey, the hypnotist, and he would do his show, which basically consisted of hypnotizing this medium, putting his medium into a trance, and then members of the audience could ask questions of the medium, like, oh, will I get married? Or I'm going traveling. What should I prepare? All these kind of questions that people always answer. And then this medium would bring answers. This particular guy, Dr. Salomon Bey, said they brought answers from the world of the spirits and would then give them to the audience. It's a thing that happens not just in Egypt, right? I mean, that's a reasonably common stage act. But it was going on in Egypt, and I hadn't heard about it at all. I didn't know anything about it. And I sort of thought, well, where is this coming from? What's the story here? What's going on? How come I've never heard about these people?
Let me give our listeners a little bit of context. What Raphael is referring to is what still exists in Egypt today. It's like a program of a show, of a performance, a variety show, if you like, in the lack of a better word. So in the 20s and in the 30s, in the 40s, still today in Egypt, we have like you pay a ticket to a cabaret or to a restaurant or to a theater, and you have a program for the night with different presentations like dancers, comedians, an hypnotist, different acts, different tabloat. Yani in Egypt, people say tableau. It's like a presentation, a mise en scène, a presentation. So these guys, the supposed mystics, were part of those programs in the golden era. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah. And there's lots of adverts of them, and they also appeared in newspapers. There were articles about them, and they also gave, in a sense, their performances in these cabarets were kind of adverts for their private business, which was you would go to visit them, often actually in a hotel room that they book out as their kind of offices, because they weren't necessarily from Egypt. They often traveled. And you would visit them, and then they would give you a sort of personal reading.
That's where the interest for these characters came from. I'm supposing that you learned a lot from that first book. I don't have the physical book here with me, but what I'm going to do is we're going, in the edition of the episode, we're going to add the cover of Midnight in Cairo, because that's particularly interesting for my listeners, mostly dancers. That's about incredible characters of the golden era in Egypt, entertainers mostly. Badia Masabni comes to mind. It's the name that I'm the most fascinated by, because she was such a central figure in the development of the dance, and the dance as a business, as we know it today, more professionalized, more structured, with a kind of presentation that before Badia that didn't exist. So we're talking a transition phase in Egyptian dance from the Khawazi in the street and the awelem in private places, in the harems and, the women's quarters, because the awelem did not perform in front of men, and they did not perform in front of strangers, basically. And then Badia Masabni inaugurating a more professional, more serious way of presenting Egyptian dance, aside from other things. What drew you initially to those characters of the entertainment in Egypt to write Midnight in Cairo? Let's go back just a little bit into that book.
I think, my main impetus was kind of, I guess, as a historian, as it were. A historian of the culture of modern Egypt, not necessarily dance and entertainment, though I've always been interested in theatre primarily, and actually as soon as you start to read about theatre, even sort of very high Shakespearean theatre in Egypt in the early 20th century, it becomes very obvious that it's totally enmeshed with the world of dance and song as well. Often the same people are both dancing and acting in the theater and singing at the same time. It's literally the same people doing it, and it's the same venues often, so you can't really separate it. What I think first got me into that book was looking at all these entertainment magazines, which I was sort of originally doing for theater, but then went into dance and song. And actually seeing how prominent women and women's lives were in the 1920s and 1930s, and sort of saying, well, as a historian, as it were, which maybe I am, maybe not sure, but let's call myself that for now. We're always told that, women's stories, until around the 50s and 60s, you're not going to find them anywhere. They didn't leave many records. They often couldn't write. So we'd love to find women's stories, but we just don't know where. And then it turns out, well, here were a huge number of them, not only their careers in the 20s and 30s, but often they were interviewed and told their life stories going much further back, often pretty traumatic life stories. But perhaps the life of an entertainer in the 20s and 30s was more often than not pretty traumatic, though some succeeded and went on to live good lives and successful lives. But yeah, and so looking at that, you could see there's this whole world which is fascinating, and women are really at the center of it. So I just sort of took that as a starting point and said, okay, well, let's see where this goes, basically.
Till today, there is this idea in Egypt that if you're going to follow the arts, being an entertainer, an actress, a singer, a dancer is always a kind of a dangerous decision. You're going to fall into some sort of misery, moral misery for sure, because it's so out of the Islamic rule and the Islamic mentality and what a woman is supposed to be doing. That is still true today. And there is this idea, very old idea, very perhaps even coming before the 20s, before the period that you illustrated in your book, that if you dare to go into those fields which are not appropriate for women, because in an Islamic country, women are not supposed to be public. That's the main problem here. It's not the specificity of the craft itself only. It's before the specific traits of a craft, like dance, for instance, raqs sharki, there is the basic problem that women are doing it in public. They're doing it in public. They're exposing themselves in front of strangers, in front of men who are not their husband, their immediate family. That's not good. And also they are in charge, which is another contradiction to what is supposed to be happening. Women are not supposed to be in charge. The man is. So if you are in a public spot as a performer and you are in charge of an orchestra, of a team, that's frowned upon and it's never going to end well. That's the idea. It's like a cloud that hangs over every female entertainer in Egypt till today. That still happens today. It's like, oh my God, don't go there. Why would you go there? Unless you really need it, unless you're really poor. Why would you become a ra'asa? Why would you become an actress? Yeah, and you come from a bad family? Are you lost? Are you disoriented? What's happening? Till today, this environment that you were describing of women not ending well in the arts still lingers.
Yeah, and you say maybe this goes back further, and maybe it does, but what is interesting about the 20th century, starting from maybe the very end of the 19th century, is that this becomes a business much more than, Badi'a Masabni is definitely instrumental in increasing that, but before her it was a business. After her, it became more of a business. And what I'm kind of interested in, which doesn't appear in the book, although I'm actually just writing a very short article about this now, is who is behind all of these people in the 20s and 30s. I'm writing this article about this man called Ahmed Bey, who is, I think, not well known at all, but he features very briefly in Midnight in Cairo. He worked in Germany for a long time. He opened a club in Vienna during the war. He was also, I mean, most well-known thing about him is that he was a extremely big Nazi sympathizer, the most prominent Nazi sympathizer in 1930s Cairo. He would, wear a swastika on his arm. But that's not why I'm interested in him. He was also probably in the 30s, the most prominent dance agent. So he would book women who came from Europe mostly to come to Cairo and perform. And he would also book Egyptian dancers to go to Europe and perform there. And he was clearly extremely exploitative. I mean, what do you expect from an artist?
That sounds like a character.
Yeah, but he is behind. So Hikmet Fahmy, who maybe you know that name, who's again famous for her probably largely fictionalized role as a sort of spy in World War II Cairo, and there's a movie about her from the 90s called Hikmet Fahmy Gasusa.
No, I don't know. I don't know about her. I'm gonna check.
And she's famous like largely for that, but she also did this tour of Europe in the mid 1930s, organized by Ahmed Bey, and he was there's one story that she for every £20 that she got paid, he pocketed 15, and she got 5.
Probably.
And he treated her very badly, and then faked these letters that he sent home to the newspapers to pretend that she was having a great time in order to try and convince other dancers to go do the same business. And he's just interesting because it's very seldom see what is going on behind the scenes of that world in the 1920s and 30s.
Okay, I understand what you mean. And it's still a lot going on behind the scenes. So even today, in a market like the Egyptian dance market, for instance, I'm going to talk about what I know best. What lie beneath is a series, it's a network of men who run the show. And yes, they're exploitative. And yes, they're sexual harassers. And yes, there is a lot of monkey business going on. And those are the ones who hire and fire and decide who is going to become a star. So there is a network that you don't see mentioned because they're not the glamorous ones, see? They're the ones who make it happen for dancers somehow for different reasons, but they're not the protagonists. So, and they're happy being in the shadow because most of them, they know they're not good. So how are you going to portray them in a nice way if their business is not nice? But that's an interesting angle. And for sure, that is not explored in any book that I know of.
Yeah, because it's so hard to find information about it. You get the names of some people, but Ahmed Bey really is the only one who...
Ahmed Bey. Okay. Yeah, that sounds interesting. Now, what do you think we Westerners, and of course I'm generalizing big time by saying Westerners, even the concept of Westerners now, well, not now, for a while has been questioned, right? East and West, what is it exactly that we mean? But for the sake of a clear communication, and people know what I mean, Westerners, why is it that we keep fascinated with the Middle East and Middle Eastern culture? What is the fascination there? What is it that they have that we probably don't have that keeps drawing us there?
Yeah, well, to answer that question, I guess, so I'll turn to Holy Men of the Electromagnetic Age, because in a sense, one of the central questions of that book is the relationship between East and West. Broadly kind of constructed. And like you say, I think partly an attempt to deconstruct that a little bit. So the two men that it focuses around are this guy Tahra Bey, and then that's the sort of first half really, and then the second half is Dr. Dahish. And Tahra Bey is a fascinating character. He's Armenian who's born in Istanbul, becomes a refugee in the 1920s. His sort of background before 1923 is very unclear. But then in 1923, he appears in Athens as Tahra Bey, the Egyptian fakir.
Yeah.
And he does this kind of, it's a stage show, really. I mean, he's a performer. And the show is that he can pierce his body without feeling pain, that he can, alter his heart rate. And the big finale is that he can bury himself alive for a long period of time. But it is a stage show, but it's not just a stage show. He says two things about it. One, and which is why I consider him a kind of occult performer. One, he is harnessing these sort of powers beyond the realm of the perceptible that allow him to do this. He's kind of a little bit vague about how he does it, but sort of he's using the power of his spirit to control his body, and that's how he can not feel pain or put himself into a death-like state. And then the other thing that he really plays up is his kind of mysterious and exotic Eastern heritage, which is pretty much made up, let's say. I mean, it's not entirely made up because he is an Armenian and he's born in Istanbul, but he's definitely not an Egyptian, and he's definitely not a fakir from a long line of fakirs, which he says is what he is. And then he becomes very popular. He travels through Greece, goes through Italy, then ends up in Paris, where he really, for a year, he becomes this massive star, a genuinely massive star, even though I would say he's totally forgotten now. People don't know anything about him. But in the mid-1920s, he was very well known. And a large part of that appeal was something about the atmosphere of the 1920s, I think, which is, to go back to one of your previous questions, what is so interesting about it to me is that it's a kind of world, especially in Paris, but maybe as also elsewhere, to the kind of foundations of civilization have collapsed. No one knows where to reach, and lots of people are reaching for new things, which are making new promises, all kinds of new things, political, but one of those things is the East. And people are sort of basically saying, well, Western civilization didn't work out that well. Let's see what they've got in the East.
Let's not forget, at that time, we're fresh out of First World War.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Very important.
That's important to understand why people are trying to, carpe diem, seize the day, make the best out of life, but also curious about death and what happens to the soul, and what could happen if we lived in a different way. Of course, fantasizing a lot about the mysticism and the spiritual life, alleged spiritual life of the East. And I'm not saying it's not real. Again, I spent a long time working and living in Egypt, in Lebanon as well, in Oman. I have a fair experience of the Middle East, and I'm not going to go deep into it because that would be a completely different episode. The spiritual practices of Middle Eastern countries. Wow, that's a huge subject, and a part of it is as real as it comes. A part of it is, I think, fantasized the same way they fantasize about us and how we live and the promises of the West, especially America. America, USA. It's a big. Oh my God, the green card. My life is solved. My life is perfect. If I ever get to America. There is this myth from the Middle East towards the Western countries, and then we also have the myth looking at them and imagining, oh no, they're so much more soulful, so much more spiritual, so much more fill the blank with your fantasy of need, right?
That is kind of the story of Tahra Bey, is that he can exploit that.
They both can. Both characters in your book, they're very good at exploiting that curiosity, that fantasy, the projections, the imagination, and wanting a bit of that thrill.
Mm-hmm.
Because, one of the things that I noticed being in Middle Eastern countries brings is the thrill, the adrenaline. Adrenaline. It's the thrill. It's hard to put into a word, but in the West, we live in such an organized manner, and we're so proud of it. And thank God we do, because, that's part of our evolution, how we evolved as a civilization. We're socially more organized. We're legally more organized. We're politically more organized. But that also steals a lot of the spontaneity, the chaos, the creative chaos, and the magic that you still experience in countries like Egypt. So of course we're thirsty of it, right? We want a bit of that spice, we want a bit of it. Now, the question of spirituality, because there are two main branches in your book, in your newest book, about these two amazing characters. One is the life of the characters and the way they exploit the curiosity Westerners have for everything exotic, everything Middle Eastern, everything spiritual, whatever that means. And, it's a big word. But on another dimension, this book is also about the belief or the need to believe in something after life. When we die, what happens? I want to believe there is something after. What is your personal take on it? After having researched for the book, after having lived what you have lived so far, how do you see this question of the afterlife? Where is your stand right now?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question. So part of the background, just to say, of kind of both of these characters, but especially Dr. Dahish, who is the other character in this book, is spiritualism, this movement that started in America, so not spirituality, but spiritualism with a capital S.
Yes.
Started in America in the 19th century, which basically said what you're saying, that, well, so the soul survives after death, and that's point number one, which most religions believe too. But then point number two is that using, whether it's modern science or kind of mediums, who are people who are especially in tuned to this world, we can then contact this world and speak to people. Point number one, I think is, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you're going to drag me on whether I have an opinion on point number one, but it's pretty plausible. I mean, more people believe in that in the world than don't believe in that. That the soul survives after death.
And why do we want to believe in that so much? Why do we need it? Why do you think we need it so much?
Well, it's sort of impossible to imagine what it would be like if we just died.
You can just die, gone, over, game over.
Yeah,
what's so serious about that?
What does that feel like?
Nothing.
It feels very. I mean, I remember as a child just being totally confused by that notion. That you would go to sleep and never wake up again, and then you would not feel anything.
Physically, that's pretty much what happens, right? It is weird when you think about it, but physically, that's the process. The question is, does the soul survive past the body?
I guess, and it also is based in a belief that we are more than just flesh.
Do you think we're more than just flesh?
I'm not convinced. I'm agnostic on that. I know. I think I know what you think. What's your view?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, when I shared the notes of what we are going to speak in the episode, I told you I was going to share a story. In one of my trips to Ireland for work, I slept in a castle where the event was going to take over. And during the night, I was awakened by that people, and I talked to them, and they touched me. And there was a real conversation like I'm having with you, with 3 people who had died with their souls, basically. And that changed my perception of everything, because one thing, one thing is you read about it, you consider it. I'm not sure, as you said, I'm agnostic. I'm not sure. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. I just don't have any indication of any certainty. But once you have this experience.
And you say that changed your whole life, your whole perspective on the world?
Of course. Because suddenly something that I've always considered, like you were saying, agnostically, I'm not sure, maybe not. It's a fact, right? And the fact that our soul doesn't die, not only the fact that our soul doesn't die, but I don't know if all souls or some souls, they can come back to this dimension and interact with us. This is why some people can see. They can talk with people who have passed, That's why I could see them. That's why they could wake me up, in the bed. The first one, he woke me up. He touched my shoulder like a person. I said, what the hell is going on here? My brain had to rearrange itself to digest the experience. And of course, it gives you a completely different view of what is life, what is eternity, what happens when we die. For me, it became a certainty. And it made me more peaceful, I guess. It gave me some sort of
It could be scary. It could be a scary thing to think as well.
You think? Scary?
Yeah. I mean, what happens to your soul after you're gone?
Yeah, where does it go, right? Where does it stay? Is there like a living room with all the souls cohabitating and talking and dancing? I don't know. But they go somewhere. They don't disappear. And obviously, this raises the question of reincarnation, which is, if the soul doesn't die, does it incarnate again or not? So that opens, from that point, you start questioning many other things, but the question is, what was once a supposition is now a fact that I have seen with my own eyes. Nobody told me.
What do you think on the reincarnation?
What do I think?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. On that aspect, I'm not sure. I tend to believe it is possible that, yes, we reincarnate, but I'm not sure. I'm very rational and very skeptical, very down to earth. So, I had to see to believe, you see. I had to speak with people who had passed to believe that the soul does not die. And now I do. In regards to reincarnation, I'm not sure. Yeah. I have more questions than answers, for sure.
And so in this book, Tahirah, I think it's fair to say is basically a con artist.
Yes.
Then the question, Dr. Dahesh, becomes a slightly more difficult question, because there is evidence of people saying things, okay, not entirely dissimilar to what you said, but i.e., well, I saw this happen. He has numerous followers who write things, and they say, well, I saw all these incredible things happen, and you can't convince me that this wasn't a miracle. As a historian, what are you supposed to do with that? In a sense, you can't answer that question. You can say, well, I may or may not believe this person, but if you don't have any reason, and let's say there's 5 people who say this, if you don't have any specific reason to say, well, okay, you definitely didn't see this because X, Y, Z, what can you do? There's kind of you're in a corner, historically speaking. So my kind of
these are,
that in the book is to be much more like, well, why did this guy become so popular, and what is he telling us about the history and culture of this period? But if he was genuinely performing miracles, well, then there's your answer.
I think, these 2 characters that you wrote about, they were probably successful, at least for a while, because they mixed what till today a lot of what the new age gurus do, which is they mix reality with imagination, with memory, with sensation, with fantasy, with projection, with wishful thinking, with there is a mix. It's not a black and white subject. It's, you kind of play with people's minds as they did, because there is a very fine line between the reality and the imagined. There is a very fine line. We think it's very different, but it's not. They're always, we're creatures of imagination. We're creatures of fantasy.
Yeah, you just have to look at the way that 10 different people will give you 10 different stories of an event that actually happened.
Exactly. So the way they played with spirituality and the curiosity of people, what happens if, are we more than a body? What is the power of the soul? What is a superpower? What is it that they know in the Middle East that we don't know about? All this mix of curiosity triggers, right? They mixed it very well, as they still do today. There are versions of this character still today, with the way we want to believe in the afterlife, the way we want to go back home, because that's the sensation of believing there is a soul and the soul survives. It's this feeling of, I have a home to go back to. Once I die, or once my loved ones die, it doesn't end there. It continues. That's reassuring to the human being, so there is a mix of so many things, and they were master manipulators at managing those different triggers: imagination, wishful thinking, need, desire, fear, curiosity. They mix them very well, and they sell the product in a very efficient way, as they still do today. Again, there are versions of these characters still today. There is on page 61 a quote from an American president, Calvin Coolidge, that I found particularly important. Well, particularly important to me, because this speaks to a concern of mine. I think we have lost track of, I wouldn't call a religious life, but of a soulful life. I think really, collectively speaking, we're kind of losing our souls. We're losing our humanity. For different reasons. And in this quote, the president tells his people to cultivate the reverence which they had for the things that are holy. So in another way of putting it, to go back to religion, go back to God, go back to the material, to a life which is not purely materialistic, right? What happened to us, and when did the transition between a more spiritually aligned life to a materialistic life happened?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And so in the 1920s, particularly in Europe, and actually more in Europe, particularly in America, but in the West, should we say, people are obsessed with this idea that everything has become too material, and they've lost, spirituality has been lost, and everyone just cares about what that can mean. We often use materialistic now to mean just everyone cares about making money, which I think is part of it. But also, in a broader way, people don't care about the metaphysical and the spiritual and all the rest of it. One answer to give might be the sort of the disappointing answer to you, or what you're not looking for, is that, well, that's always been a struggle in humanity, basically, between this struggle between the material and the spiritual did not suddenly appear in the 19th century or something. That in fact the entirety of human history is about, or people are negotiating this struggle. Sometimes a little bit more than others, perhaps. So maybe in the 1920s it comes to the fore a little bit more, but it's always been there. I mean, in order to really make that case, I'd have to, write a long book about it. But that would be my instinct.
That's not disappointing at all. That's actually the perfect answer, at least for me, because when we think about that that conflict. Of course, we can argue, nowadays we're living, even in Egypt, even in the Middle East, although with different tones, we're living in a highly materialistic, capitalistic system. It's like you can barely breathe without paying $1. It feels like you have to pay for everything. You have to pay to exist. Capitalism has reached this peak where I'm talking for myself, okay, guys? It's like this is my sensation. It's asphyxiating.
Yeah.
Because you have to pay for everything to exist as a human being on planet Earth. Today, you need money. And that, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, this is good or bad, I'm just stating it. Mm-hmm. And that, for most people, doesn't leave space for a spiritual life. What spiritual life? I'm trying to survive here.
Yeah.
Let me put bread on the table first, right? Because we tend to the physical needs first.
And everything now has a monetary value, even the spiritual life.
Exactly. So I do agree with you that there is like perhaps a division or a conflict, an internal conflict in every human being between our material selves, our material life, and our spiritual life, and how do they come together in an harmonious way? Is that even possible, do you think?
But it's certainly pretty rare if it's possible.
Right?
I don't think anyone doesn't feel in some way the way that you feel.
In the teaching of Egyptian dance, let me go a little bit off road, but in the subject. In the teaching of Egyptian dance, there are always different dimensions that people tackle. One is the physical, as it happens with every dance style. So people learn how to move, how to deal with their physical body. What do I do with this? What is it that I'm supposed to do with this? Okay. And then and I speak from my experience as a teacher, when I try to introduce dimensions like the emotional dimension, even the mental dimension, the intellectual dimension, and of course the spiritual dimension, it's incredibly hard for people to grasp. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to grasp the concept and even harder to put it into action, to turn it into a practical experience, and you must know, because you are an expert in Arabic everything, and including Arabic language. There is a word, but there are many words in Arabic that speak about an ecstatic experience. Tarab being one of them. Tarab, or nashwa, or sultana. These are words that Egyptian musicians, for instance, they throw around all the time. Like, you're supposed to get yourself into an ecstatic, soulful mode. The question is, and this is my observation, we have lost the ability to go into that state, especially in the West. Everything is so fast. Everything is so dry. Everything is so competitive. Everything is so focused on performance, and the ability to let go and allow the body to reconnect with the soul seems to be the hardest thing, for most dancers.
Yeah, but you think it's absolutely necessary?
For Egyptian dance?
Yeah.
Absolutely, 1,000% not necessary. It's not negotiable. It must be there. Of course, it depends on what level you're talking about, right? Because as it happens with every dance style, you can have Egyptian dance done at the level of a gym class. I go to Zumba class, or I go to aerobics class. Okay, let's shake a little bit. Let's lose some weight. Yeah, okay. That's in that level. Yeah, we don't need to be soulful. You don't need to really understand the music. You're there to lose some weight and have some fun. Why not? And the teacher happens to be teaching Egyptian dance. So yeah, it's fine. But if you learn Egyptian dance, yani mazbout, if you want to learn it as an art form, there comes a point where you will have to tap into other dimensions that are not physical. It's non-negotiable. Not for me, at least not from how I learned it and how I practice it. It's part of its magic. When you say, what makes Raqs al-Sharqi, what people call belly dance, so special? What makes it so special? For me, what makes it so special is that soulfulness. It's that deep sensual physicality combined with deep soulfulness. It's very weird and very, hard to put into a box because it's not one thing or the other. It's both deeply physical and sensual, but also deeply soulful. There is no contradiction there anymore. The contradiction is over. And that's very disheartening. It's very troubling for most people. They don't know how to organize this. So, okay, it's not just sensual, it's not just physical, it's not just soulful, it's both. What do you mean? They cannot be both. It's either one thing or the other. I say, no, it's both. So this is a weird proposition, but very, very old, very ancient. It's not new. It's not new. We're just rediscovering it right now. How did the writing for these two books change you? Did it change you? Because of course there is a lot of research. I imagine you spent a long time preparing to write. So before you start to write, there was a huge work of research, and then the writing itself. Did it change you, the process of writing these books, or not?
Yeah, well, I'd have to say the process of writing this book, The Holy Man of Electromagnetic Age, was much sort of longer and more torturous than the other one, partly because there was just so much I had to cut out. And I eventually ended up focusing on these two guys, but I had loads and loads of other people involved. One of whom actually would be interesting, I'm sure, to you. Have you ever heard of Valentine de Saint-Point?
No.
She is a fascinating woman, French, married young, then divorced, and then moved to Paris, where she became a poet and a writer and a kind of futurist with some Marinetti and all of these people she was friends with, whatever, D'Annunzio and Marinetti, and kind of a feminist, but she wouldn't call herself a feminist because she thought that women entering the workplace was a terrible thing and that no one should have to do any work at all. So why would women never want to work? But then, and why she kind of becomes interesting to you, she shifts around so much in her life. But in the 1910s, she experiments with this thing called metachori, so a dance, which basically what she tries to do is do to modern dance what, Picasso had done to modern art.
Yes. Okay,
so
I'm going to check into that.
Invent these whole new forms and new ways of expressing yourself through dance. And people were pretty cynical about it at the time. And she went to New York and she performed it. I think she performed it at the Met in New York or some big venue. And again, lots of people sort of made fun of her. But it was striking. And then in the 1920s, she becomes very interested in the occult and theosophy. And she moved to Cairo in 1920, the end of 1924. And she lived the rest of her life in Cairo, doing some partly anti-colonial activism, and then she converted to Islam and did all these sort of things, and ends up
Oh, wow. I'm going to check it out.
Her because of that move to Cairo and her interest in the occult, and she moves out to Cairo, but for the same reasons we've been talking about, right? That the East is this place of spirituality. So if you want, as she did, a spiritual revolution, the obvious place to go is the East. And she ends up getting involved in these various Egyptian anti-colonial movements. But, I mean, and as you can tell from my sort of brief description of her, it goes all over the place. And everything about the occult and spirituality goes all over the place. People are always finding new things or making these new connections, and it's really hard to tie it down rationally, I suppose.
Because it's not a rational subject.
Yeah.
So we try to tie it down rationally, but forgetting this is beyond the rational. So how is that going to work? You try to capture it with a tool which is not fit for it. Yeah. It's not fit because it's not in the same frequency. You see, it's somehow, I believe that to talk about these subjects and in teaching Egyptian dance, sometimes I have to, You have to understand the limitations of language as we know it and the limitations of the rational mind. It's amazing. It's incredible, but it's limited. There are,
I would see like I would see spirituality as a language, a different language.
yeah, it's a different language and it's a different dimension and it's a different frequency for which the rational mind, the logic, 1 + 1 = 2 does not apply. But we still try to capture it and organize it and put it into the box of the rational mind. It's like trying to put the entire ocean
Yeah.
into a glass. How do we do that? You have to find a symbolic language, a new language that creates a bridge between the logical and the beyond logical. It's tough. It's tough, but I can see how you try to do that in this book. I loved it a lot. I learned a lot because one of the things that I like about your books is how well researched they are. And I can only imagine how much work that takes, because I'm reading and I'm thinking, oh my God, what he did to research, what he had to research to write this phrase, right? Because it comes as a condensed information, but it's coming from a lot of background work. Did these characters inspire you in some way? And I'm talking about the characters of the Holy Man of the Electromagnetic Age and also Midnight in Cairo. I know they're very different characters, but have they inspired you? Have they provoked you in some way?
What all of these characters, both Midnight in Cairo and the Holy Men of the Electromagnetic Age, I think the thing that unites them is they're great performers. I mean, they're basically, and like all great artists, perhaps, their biggest performance is their life, right? I mean, that's what they're definitely the women and also these actually both of them, all of them. This idea that they all share that life is a performance of some kind is is interesting. It's something that I probably should take more account of, in a sense, as opposed to trying to rationalize everything that you do. I mean, I guess that's the thing that can come out of it. And in fact, you think about the people who become popular and famous, probably speaking, not necessarily that's what I want to do, but they're all extremely good at performing themselves.
What is the aspect of performance that is so interesting to you? Because again, that's another common thread, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned the 20s and the 30s. I mentioned the attraction for the Middle East. I mentioned a few of the themes that I can clearly see. They're very obvious in these two books. But now you're adding another layer, another, I would call it in a good way, okay, obsession.
Yeah.
It's kind of a personal obsession. It's an unconscious drive, right? It's something that triggers you unconsciously or consciously. I'm not sure, and that makes you do things and makes you interesting in specific things. What is it about performance that makes it so interesting to you, so compelling?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could answer that question, I'd learn a lot more about myself than I know. But I think it's definitely true, and I'm working on another book right now. I'm working on two things right now. One of which I'm hoping to get some funding to give me some time off to do, which might be more interesting to you than the other one, is translation of some of the autobiographical and biographical writing about women of the 20s and 30s into English. So basically, translating the source material for Midnight in Cairo into English.
Oh my God, yeah, that would be amazing. I hope you can manage that for sure.
And I'm reasonably confident I'll be able to do it at some point. Just the question is exactly when. And then the other book is a sort of biography of this guy called James Sanua, who is an Egyptian Jewish theater maker from the late 19th century and satirist and anti-colonial activist. But one thing which is extremely clear about him is that his entire life was also a performance. He's a sort of real performer. So I'm clearly interested in people who are born performers, but I don't know why.
There's
that's my
some
kind of,
homework for you. You know what I wish? I wish someone would write a real good biography on Badia Masabni.
yeah.
Allah, I would really like that because she's such a great character and her life brings so much history with it, right? I mean, that's just leaving it in the air, okay? Do you think there is a cultural exchange between the East and the West, specifically Middle East and West? And now you must be aware, of course, you're aware, you are in the UK, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, of Muslim predominance in Europe, Islamic communities taking more space, demanding more rights, more expression in an European space, which is very proud of its own identity, its own secular government. That's a huge conquest that we've done in terms of, I believe so. At least this is how I believe. I think the separation of religious power from secular power and having our democracies and having religion as a personal choice and not as an arm from government, as an arm from the power. I think that's a huge conquest. But now we are seeing gradually more and more, for sure you have witnessed that in the UK and all over Europe now, it's a big discussion between the cultural shocks and immigrants coming, a lot of them from the Middle East, bringing their culture, bringing their religion, bringing their mentality, bringing their values, and kind of clashing with the values of the West. Is there a clash? Is there a communication? Is there an exchange? Is there what? What exactly is happening? How do we relate with Middle Eastern cultures and how do they relate with ours? What do you think?
I mean, I would say number one, especially in the UK, I can't really speak for anywhere else. The public understanding of Islam and the Middle East is basically zero, and a lot of people write a lot of bullshit about it.
What do you think is that public understanding? Give me a few slogans or a few taboos that are usually associated with Middle Eastern culture. What would those be?
I even think that we're not even on the level of anything. I think the public understanding is pretty much literally zero.
Ignorance.
People have these images in their head, they're negative about the Middle East, but they're often like contradictory somewhat to and I think the message of Holy Men of the Electromagnetic Age, at least one of them that you could get from it, is number understanding and connection is crucial, but it has to be based in reality as well. And at the moment, we really don't have that, and that can work in a number of ways. I mean, at the moment in the UK, most non-real images of Islam are negative, but that doesn't mean that we should just be totally give this positive fantasy about Islam being the greatest thing in the world, or whatever, or that no one having any problems. I think what we need is just reality. So Tahir Bey, people were obsessed with him as this fantasy Middle Eastern sheikh that was totally made up. And if we just saw Muslims as people, I think that would probably help. And in a sense, that's the message of or one of them of this book, or a message you could take from it.
Yeah, I think that one of the problems of that ignorance that you mentioned and that lack of connection between Middle Eastern cultures and, let's say, European culture is, and this may sound polarizing what I'm about to say, but again, it's honestly, I always say what I think, and it doesn't mean I'm right. Okay, so I'm always ready to retract myself and change my mind, but that's my observation. Europeans are culturally shaped to appreciate and be curious about the different. We're curious. We're naturally curious. We're naturally open. I speak about Portuguese specifically because it's my homeland. We have a long history of travelers, of going out and receiving and all sorts of movements, the discoveries and all that history. And we're always curious to know, how do they do that? How do they speak? How do they live? Do they believe the same things as we do? What are their customs? What are their habits? How is their food? How are their streets? There is a curiosity, genuine curiosity for the other. The opposite doesn't necessarily happen. And that has been my observation.
My experience of Egypt, for instance, is that Egyptians are extremely curious about other places. But one big difference is that they don't have the same opportunities to go and see them. Travel to, let's say, Europe as an Egyptian is very hard. You have to be rich, and then you have to get a visa, which today is becoming more and more and more difficult. And a lot of people I know just not bothering to apply to visas because they know
it's difficult.
It'll be an expensive and often humiliating process. They're like, oh, do you have enough ties to the country? How do I trust that you're not going to stay here?
Yeah.
For someone who just maybe wants to see Italy.
Yeah, I brought musicians to Portugal, so I took care of a few visas for musicians when I brought them to work with me. But of course, I brought them for work, and it was known, and the embassy knew me very well, and it was easy. But I know that generally it's not. But it's funny and it's interesting, you see, and different people will have different experiences. That you found Egyptians curious for other cultures. I don't have that experience, and I'm not even saying this as a critic. I'm saying this just as observation, and that was lucky for me because I learned a lot. I learned a lot about them. They did not learn much about me because nobody asked me, how is it in your country? How do you do this in your country? What do you believe in your religion? What is it that you do? Nobody asked me that. I have to be very honest. I asked about theirs.
Yeah.
I was curious.
People ask me about England quite a lot, I feel, actually. People don't talk about religion quite so open. It's sort of not a...
Maybe England is more interesting than Portugal. Maybe. I find this is a very, it's a very polemic, but I think it's a very important discussion to be had. Of course, we will not have time to go deep into it, and that's not the main theme of the podcast episode. But this question of cultural exchange and connection, how does it happen? Really, how does it happen? Is there a connection between the Middle Eastern community and the British community in Britain? Is there a connection?
There is, but that's not enough. I think I just went to the Edinburgh Fringe, and went to see some shows, and there was a sort of Palestine-themed series of shows in the Fringe, which were great. I saw only one of them. I saw Rhonda Gerard's performance, but I was talking to one of the organizers who said, like, oh, well, it basically always happens that we put on Arab shows, and largely the people in the audiences are the other people who are doing performances about Arab things at the Fringe, and it's very much.
What is it? What is it that we Westerners could learn from Middle Eastern cultures? What is it that you? Of course, there is a lot. But when I think about all my years of work and life in Egypt, mostly. Because that's where I went deeper and was for a longer time. It changed me so much, and it really shaped me. And it was a university, really. It was like a university for me, because sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree. There are many aspects of Egyptian culture that I absolutely adore, and many aspects that I don't see myself in, I don't resonate with. But even through the contrast, even through the disagreement, it has shaped me and expanded my world in such varied ways, right? And sometimes the ego and the pride in one's culture makes us believe that we have nothing to learn from the other. What would they teach me? What, how, what, why? And of course, we all have a lot to learn from each other. From your experience, what is it that we Westerners could learn from Middle Eastern cultures?
It reminds me of, there's a good story by Dennis Johnson Davies, who's a translator who died recently, who was English but grew up mostly in Egypt, I think, or maybe in India, I can't remember, outside England anyway. And then he'd been in Egypt for a while, and he got sent to boarding school in England, and then started a job there when he was 18 or something. And he went to get a pack of cigarettes and saw that he didn't have the right money. And he just said, "Don't worry, I'll pay you tomorrow." To which the guy said, "I don't think that's going to happen, actually. You won't pay me tomorrow. You'll pay me now or you won't get them." And he said, "At that moment, I realized I basically, I'm paraphrasing, but I only ever wanted to live in Egypt because that kind of thing would happen." I think, and I'm speaking probably for England now, and I'm back living in England after not having lived here for a little bit. Everyone is just so rigid and really takes a lot of pleasure in following the rules, which actually I find a little bit stifling sometimes. And in countries like Egypt, let's be honest, that's also true in countries like, say, Greece, where there's not such respect for the rules.
A little bit more free flow.
Yeah, or we don't necessarily have to respect every rule just because it's a rule.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, again, I won't go into it because it would take a long time. It's a long list. I am very critical of a lot of things, but I'm also fair. I'm critical because I got to know the reality of, living and working in Egypt and operating under Egyptian law. Okay, it's a completely different experience from the experience of the tourist or even the expatriate. So there are a lot of foreigners in Egypt and in other Middle Eastern countries that are not immersed in the culture. They live there, but they live in their own foreign bubble. They don't expose themselves to the reality of what it means to live in Egypt like Egyptians with Egyptians, which is a very different dimension than the one that most get to know. So I've known the best and I've known the worst. I love Egypt nonetheless because of all of it, the good and the bad. And I would agree with you. We have a more stiff, formal, boring way of living. I would also add just one little detail, which is what I call the timeless time of Egypt. Nobody is in a hurry. And that fascinated me and irritated me for a while, like, why is no one running here? Because we're coming, from a Western country where everything is about time, productivity, yalla. We have to hurry because time is money and we're losing time. Hurry. Everything happens so fast and everything is under pressure. And in Egypt, it's like, why hurry? You're rushing where exactly? يعني فين؟ رايحة فين? What is the point of so much rushing? It took me time to slow down. It's like a different frequency. You have to tune into a different frequency. It took me time because I still wanted everyone. Imagine, this is the colonizer's head, of course. I wanted the entire country to start running because I was running. Say, no. Nobody is going to run. You have to slow down. If you want to be here and cohabitate, and you have to slow down. I said, okay, khalas, but I will try. And it really changed everything because you appreciate life more, you're more present, you celebrate more, you enjoy more, you take more pleasure on things. really higher quality of life.
Yeah.
There is no way of putting it, you know. That is, amongst many other things, a jewel, you know, a real gift from living in the Middle East, and really learning how to live as they do, and putting myself in the position of the student, which is something that so many of us don't do. We don't like to be in the position of the student. I like to be in the position of the student. So let me learn from you. How do you do it, guys? It doesn't mean that in the end I'm going to do it exactly as they do, because I still have my identity and my culture and my values, but a lot of what they have taught me remains with me. And I believe it had made me a better person, more interesting. I do believe that. So it's important, I think, especially now with all the movement that we're seeing, political movement, globalization, the constant moving of populations, also because of wars, of course. It's increasingly important to understand what is it that we can learn from other cultures, and how do we create connection? I think this is it's a central question.
Yeah.
I
A
don't have an
genuine
answer.
connection.
Sorry?
A genuine connection.
A genuine connection. How do we create a genuine connection between these apparently opposite cultures? How? A genuine connection. I think this is really it's one of the questions of the upcoming decades in the world, because you know everything is changing. We're mingling. People are arriving. They're leaving. There is a cohabitation like never before between completely different religions, ways of life. How do we find the real connection? Okay, I am going to leave the question in the air, and I am going to invite everyone to comment on this because I'm curious. I don't know the answer. And I've been living and working between cultures since forever, and I honestly, I don't have an answer. So we are going to close, suggesting your two books, of course. I am going to share them in the show notes. We have the new book, Holy Men of the Electromagnetic Age, A Forgotten History of the Occult. And we have The Midnight in Cairo. I don't have my copy here. They're both amazing. We are going to share them in the show notes alongside with the podcast newsletter link so that everyone can join us. And now we are going to close. Is there anything you would like to add about one of these books?
Let's wrap it up.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
So we're going to have a fast ping pong question and answer, and then I'm going to ask you for a few recommendations, which I'm always very eager to get to. Favorite word?
I'm gonna give an Arabic word, just because it sort of connects to some of the stuff we were talking about. It's mutasha'il, which is a word coined by Emil Habibi with Saeed al-Mutasha'il, which is translated as pessimist. So it's a combination of mutafa'il and mutasha'im. And it sort of connects to what we were talking about, this idea of being able to hold two things in yourself at once, both the pessimist and the optimist. Also from a very good book, Saeed the Pessimist. Sort of
Okay, I'm going to add an expression, Egyptian expression to that. Dam khafif.
Yeah, that is good.
دم خفيف يعني.
Yeah.
Guys, dam is blood, literally blood, but خفيف is light, something يعني. دم خفيف, usually we use it to someone who is light, well-humored, doesn't take anything too seriously, too heavy يعني. دم خفيف. That makes sense with the word that you shared. Favorite feeling?
Relaxation.
That's in tune with Middle Eastern culture. Very much in tune. Very much in tune. Okay. Favorite food?
Favorite food? Jerk chicken and rice and peas.
Okay. Very straightforward. Favorite music?
Favorite music? Tarab.
ماشي. Favorite place?
I mean, I have to say Cairo.
Okay.
And also least favorite place.
What makes it so special for you?
I mean, I think it's what we already said. It's so. I mean, I think partly I was there at a time in its life and my life which were interesting. Like in my 20s during the Arab Spring. But I think it's not just that. But
Yeah, it's a fascinating city. There is so much happening at the same time, all the time, 24/7. It's a little bit triggering for the nervous system,
yeah,
if you're there all the time, and if you are, again, if you are immersed in, you're always alert. You're always alert because there is always something happening, but it's really incredible. Absolutely. One wish for yourself.
that everyone buys my book.
One wish for the world.
Oh God, relaxation.
One positive change we can do, we can make to empower ourselves, whatever you understand by empowerment.
Uh, be more present. Put down your phone.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Recommendations, books that you recommend aside from your own.
I I'm just going to recommend one book that I read recently that I really liked, which is perhaps not anything like any of my books, but Noreen Masud's book called A Flat Place, about it's kind of a memoir, but it's about enjoying flat, open spaces as a way to combat trauma.
Okay, that's interesting. Very specific.
Yeah, just a really beautiful, well-written book.
Okay. Movie or movies or documentaries that you recommend?
Uh, the Sudanese movie Talking About Trees, which I don't know if anyone. So it's a documentary about filmmakers trying to basically start a cinema in Sudan, but just really a great documentary about making art and the community of making art in a place where it's made difficult by the government.
Recommended music.
Recommended music. I would recommend people, particularly listening to this, if they haven't already, to go to the website of Amar, AMAR, which is a Lebanese, I forget what it stands for, but a Lebanese organization that just puts out lots of great classic Arabic music.
I don't know that. I'm going to check
Yeah,
it.
and
Now I'm curious.
they make CDs which they sell, but you can also access a lot of it just online through the website.
One word that uplifts your soul.
Uh, um, that one I couldn't come up with an answer for. I don't deal in
Okay.
just words.
Okay.
Anyway,
Perhaps what lies beyond words.
yeah, very good.
Maybe. So we're going to close with my guest, which is you asking me anything you want. Anything.
Well, I was going to ask you to about your experiences in with the soul surviving, but you already answered that question. So I'd like to know actually what music you recommend.
Okay, so I am going to be very predictable, okay, because I think I will be predictable for a good reason. So I am going to recommend Kulthum. Why it's predictable? Because it's such a well-known reference and it's so iconic. It's of course, but perhaps the less known reason why I recommend Kulthum, it's because it's an education in itself. Even if you don't know Arabic, you don't understand what she's saying, you don't understand the music, who is this lady with this weird voice? I remember when I started listening to Kulthum, I couldn't understand it. My ears were not ready. I was, people love this. What? Wait, why? It took me time to really listen and feel. But listening to Kulthum music, any music, any song from her takes you not only to a different culture, but to a different emotion, to a different sensibility, which lies in the heart of Egyptian identity. And you don't have to understand it, you just have to feel it.
Nice.
Okay, so this is what I recommend for everyone. I'm not talking about dancers only, I'm talking for anyone, everyone. Just listen. Even if you don't like it, it's strange, it annoys you, just listen to it and let it work on you.
Mm-hmm.
Because the music works on you, let it work on you. So that's my recommendation. Thank you so much for being here one more time. It was a pleasure to receive you at our podcast. I am going to recommend one more time the newest book, as well as Midnight in Cairo, which of course a lot of dancers have bought because, come on, why wouldn't you? You are going to understand so much more about what is now considered modern Egyptian dance or Raqs Sharki when you read your book, your first book. All the references about your books, how to reach you in the show notes. And thank you again. Wish you all the best. And I am waiting for the book on Badia Masabni. I'm not saying you promised, but I'm saying that you did. This is very manipulative, but I hope one day you will go for Badia Masabni because it's so rich. You can even treat it as a fictional character. Nobody will believe this was real because her life was really something. So I'm leaving you the suggestion / request. Thank you. Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.